Okay, so now we look at what is Bohr effect. So actually, what is Bohr effect? Okay, so it is an effect which is due to an increase of carbon dioxide in blood and decrease in pH. Okay, so what happen if Bohr effect is occur? There is a displacement of oxygen dissociation curve by a change in pH or increase in carbon dioxide. Okay, so secara ringkas, bila berlakunya Bohr effect, dia adalah keadaan di mana bila sahaja berlakunya increasing of carbon dioxide in blood. Okay, so what is the relation? Kalau misalnya carbon dioxide tinggi, maksudnya hydrogen ion pun akan tinggi. So bila hydrogen ion tinggi, so it will decrease the pH. So once pH decrease and also once there is an increase in carbon dioxide concentration, so what happen to oxygen dissociation curve? It will have displacement. Okay, so what happen once Bohr effect is occur? So it will decrease the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. So what happen? Oxyhemoglobin dissociate and more oxygen is released to the active tissue. Then it will cause oxygen dissociation curve to shift to the right. Okay, so nanti kita akan tengok apa maksud dia. So apa yang awak kena take note di sini, Bohr effect will occur when there is an increasing of carbon dioxide and also decreasing in pH. So what happened to the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen? It will be decreased. So once affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen is decreased, so what happened to oxyhemoglobin? It will be dissociate and it will release oxygen. Then what happened to the oxygen dissociation curve? It will be shift to the right. Okay, so secara ringkas yang ini macam yang saya dah explain tadi. So in active cell, when concentration of carbon dioxide increase, so this carbon dioxide will react with water to form carbonic acid, and this carbonic acid will be dissociate into bicarbonate ion and also hydrogen ion. So bila carbon dioxide tinggi, hydrogen ion pun akan tinggi. So bila hydrogen ion tinggi, the acidity of blood also will be increased and it will lower the pH. Okay, so what is the effect to the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen when this situation is occur? So it will decrease the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen. Maksudnya kecenderungan hemoglobin terhadap oksigen akan rendah. So what happen? Oxyhemoglobin will release more oksigen. Okey, kenapa oxyhemoglobin release oksigen? Maksudnya yang ini macam dalam equation yang saya bagi tadi, oxyhemoglobin bila dia riliskan oksigen, so it will produce oxygen plus hemoglobin. So what happened to the hemoglobin? Hemoglobin actually it will bind to the hydrogen ion to form hemoglobinic acid. So why hemoglobin must bind to the hydrogen ion? It will prevent the blood from becoming acidic. So that's why kalau kita tengok dalam keadaan yang macam ni, affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen will be decreased. Okay, so let's say if the question give you the graph like this. Okay, so this is the oxygen dissociation curve of hemoglobin in different pH. So if you look at this graph, so this is the percentage oxygen saturation of hemoglobin against partial pressure of oxygen. So in the graph here, there are two graphs. The first graph will shows oxygen dissociation curve for pH 7.2. Another one is oxygen dissociation curve with pH 7.4. So based on pH 7.2 adalah lebih rendah daripada pH 7.4. So means that pH 7.2 is more acidic compared to pH 7.4. So that's why based on oxygen dissociation curve for pH 7.2, it is to the right. Dia adalah di sebelah kanan compare dengan pH 7.4 di sebelah kiri. Nah, ni kanan, yang ni kiri. So yang ni yang kita maksudkan sebagai kalau misalnya berlaku decreasing in pH, so the oxygen dissociation curve will shift to the right. Okay. So, based on the explanation, at pH 7.2, the ODC curve, so this is the ODC curve, is to the right compared to pH 7.4. Why? This is because pH 7.2, the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen is lower than pH 7.4. So, yang ini maksudnya kita bezakan dari segi affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen. Since it curve is shift to the right, so means that the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen is lower compared to pH 7.4. So what happened at this time? Oxyhemoglobin dissociate and release oxygen. Okay. So dia mesti kena relate lah. Kalau hemoglobin affinity towards oksigen rendah, maksudnya hemoglobin akan lebih senang untuk riliskan oksigen. But for pH 7.4, the ODC curve is to the left. Maksudnya di sebelah kiri compare to pH 7.2. Because of what? Hemoglobin, okay, at pH 7.4 has greater affinity to oxygen compared to hemoglobin at pH 7.2. So what happen bila kita kata hemoglobin has greater affinity to oxygen, okay, then hemoglobin of pH 7.2, so means that, okay, the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen at pH 7.4 is high compared to the pH 7.2. So as a conclusion, untuk pH yang lebih rendah, maksudnya kalau dia lebih acidic, okay, dari segi affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen is low, and also oxyhemoglobin dissociate and release oxygen, and also less hemoglobin will bind to the oksigen. Tapi kalau untuk pH 7.4, since dia adalah pH dia lebih tinggi daripada pH 7.2, so the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen is greater. So what happen at this time? So means that more hemoglobin will bind to the oxygen. Okay, so this is the difference in pH. Okay, different of ODC of hemoglobin in different pH. Okay, so means that this one you have to relate with the Bohr effect. So ingatlah, Bohr effect tu maksudnya it will occur due to an increase of carbon dioxide. So bila increase in carbon dioxide, so pH akan decrease. So what happen? It will decrease the affinity of hemoglobin towards oxygen. Then oxyhemoglobin dissociate and more oxygen is released to the active tissue. So what happened to the oxygen dissociation curve? Oxygen dissociation curve will shift to the right.